Today, Rahdo runs through his top 10 games of all time. Yes, this is it, folks. I'm going to do a countdown from number 10 to number 1. These are the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Or actually, I shouldn't say necessarily the best games of all time, but certainly my favorite board, dice, and card games of all time. Absolutely love them. This is actually a really static list. You can go on Board Game Geek and see that I am constantly adjusting my ratings for games all the time. As new games come in, as I play games more, I'm constantly shifting up and down. But these 10 generally stay pretty safe, pretty static. I mean, they really are heads and shoulders above the rest. And it's interesting, I have pretty much talked about, I think, all of these games at length in more than one video. Actually, 9 of these 10 I've done full run-throughs for. So if you want to know more, you can actually watch those run-throughs. And links of those will be at the end of the video, on the annotations. There's only one that I haven't actually done a run-through for yet. I'll mention that at the time. But even still, that one I've actually talked about at great length because it was in, I think, my top 10 games of 2010. So since I've already gone over all these games in previous videos, I don't think I'm going to spend much time opening up the box and going into a lot of detail about the gameplay. I mean, these are all fairly well-known games. Instead, I will try to cut to the chase and maybe not pontificate quite so much and actually just as quickly and as elegantly as I can just say why these 10. And, or for me, that is. And enough preamble. Let's actually see if I can actually pull that off. Let's see if I can get this video done in 20 minutes. Is that even remotely possible? I don't know. But let's give it a try. Maybe 30 minutes. Let's give me 30 minutes on the clock, starting now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here we go with number 10. Shipyard. Hello, everybody. Sorry about that kind of abrupt jump cut there. Oh my gosh. You know how I'm always making goofs in my videos? Just dumb little mistakes. I forget to make a move or I forget to pay a bill or something like that. That extends beyond me, actually playing a complicated game while filming. That extends to me just counting, because clearly I cannot count from 1 to 10. Because I actually just now finished filming my top 10 games of all time video, and I went back and checked it as I was uploading, and I noticed, wait a minute, there's only 9 games on here because I was trying to write up the notes, and there were only 9. I absolutely skipped my number 10 game of all time, Diverft, or Shipyard. And, I am so embarrassed. So, I just jumped back on the camera, and by the way, I'm exhausted. That last video, it took it out of me, so I'm just kind of chilling on the couch, and I figured I'd spend a few minutes talking about Shipyard, because it is an excellent game. Now, there's really 2 things I would actually say about this game. First of all, the first thing about it is that, one of the things we really find satisfying is the sense of accomplishment we get for actually building one of these big, massive ships. Or actually, the success in this game generally comes from building 1 or 2 over the course of the entire game, building 1 or 2 really big ships and scoring a lot of points, or building several smaller ones. The game's really kind of wide open in how you want to play and score your points. But it is so gratifying. You really get a real sense of accomplishment at the end when you've actually built one of these. And now, the key word there being built. This is going to be a common refrain throughout this entire top 10, and in fact, I talk about that quite a bit when in my number 9, which you'll hear in a minute. Although at the time I thought I was talking about my number 10, so anyway, I'll talk more about everything I say about building and what it means to me and Jen, my wife, as board gamers. Everything I say about that I'll say in the next game, but it applies to this one definitely. This is a great game, and you really feel in your bones like you did a good job when you finish and you tally up your points and you see what it is you've created. Wonderful in that regard. The other thing that's interesting about this game, though, of all my top 10 games, there's a common refrain amongst all of them. They are all, for the most part, not entirely, but almost all, very simple, streamlined in terms of their gameplay mechanisms. They have a real Euro elegance to them. This game, This game is crazy, over the top, both in terms of its weight, in terms of how heavy it is as a game, how tough the decisions are, how much stuff you have to keep in your mind and balance and keep track of. This game is ridiculous. This is actually one of our biggest, most complex games we own, period. And normally, Jen and I only have a certain amount of tolerance. When things get too complex and over the top, we tend to kind of tune out. But Shipyard is so good, and I think it is because the actual game, that sense of satisfaction you get for a job well done is so great. and so massively satisfying and gratifying that we enjoy it in spite of its absolutely ridiculous overtop complexity with its 1, 2, 3, 4 different rondels that are all working independently of each other. And I don't know, it must be 10 or 15 different resources we're having to balance, and all of that, and all the different rules for building the ships and testing the ships and scoring the ships and all this crazy stuff. This is a very complex game, very heavy, much more so than our normal fare. Normally we tend to be more mid-weight Euro fans, but we love Shipyard, and it's easily number 10. Okay, folks, and now I'm going to cut back to the moron who can't count to 10, because I can count to 10, but that guy, he doesn't know what he's going to talk about. He's going to be talking about how he's counting down his top 10. He's going to call his number 9 best his number 10. So give him a break, forgive him his ignorance as he goes on and talks about his number 9 game of all time. What is it? It's Nations. Actually, this is the newest game of all of these games. Came out last year. I think maybe there's one of these is a 2012 game as well. But brand new, barely made it onto lists. I mean, heck, maybe in time it'll climb. But Jen and I, we've played it several times now. I've actually played. I played this with the full complement as well as just playing a 2-player game, and I am very, very comfortable in its standing as one of my top 10 favorite games of all time. Absolutely wonderful. And so, really, what is it? In a nutshell, it is a game of building your nation from the age of antiquity all the way up to the modern era, basically like the beginning of the 20th century, surviving through wars and famines and disasters, but also rejoicing in breakthroughs in technology and inspirational leaders and all this stuff. It's a great, great game. And why is it in the top 10? That's really the question. Why? I mean, there's a lot of nation-building games. It's a full genre. And why is this the one that made it in the top 10 as opposed to, say, Through the Ages or Sid Meier's Civilization or Clash of Cultures or any of these other ones? Well, first of all, why is this in the top 10? I do love the very notion of civilization-building games. In fact, actually, they're looking at this, actually. Well, I've got another civilization building, 2, 3, actually over half of these are all about building civilizations. But actually, I think it's more than that. Easily, my favorite style of game, my favorite, and you'll see this throughout, I mean, almost every single one of these things, if you were to break a game down, this is something I used to do a lot as a video game designer when we have design discussions, break it down to a single verb. What is the verb that describes the game? For me, and this is true for Jen as well, probably my number one thing I like to do in a game is build. I mean, you could break games down into other verbs like kill or explore or deduce. I mean, you can break them down, but by far, building, creating is something that is very, very enticing to me. It makes the time I spend playing a game really feel like it was worthwhile and not out of trouble, because I accomplished something. At the end of the game, I can look at what I've created and feel a real sense of satisfaction. And so almost every single one of these games is a building game, to one scale or another. And Nations is by far the biggest one because it is, it's a civilization from the dawn of man, well, not the dawn of man, but the dawn of modern man, all the way up to today. And I love that. I mean, it's very, very enticing and attractive. But that's just why I would like a nation building game. Why this one? Probably more than anything else because it's a really, really common conceit in empire building games that a sizable portion of the game content, of the game mechanisms, are devoted to combat, are devoted to players spending a lot of time building up this epic civilization and then watching out while other players try to tear it down and destroy it. That instantly makes me hate 99% of all civilization building games because I derive no enjoyment or satisfaction from destroying something that somebody else has built. That's not even remotely interesting to me. I don't understand. My brain just doesn't work. I cannot comprehend why people would think that is fun. And as much as I hate that, even more, I hate having something that I have built up be destroyed by another player. just so that, quote, they can win. There's just nothing about it. Cooperative games I love. I don't mind an autonomous AI trying to destroy my stuff, and I have to struggle against it. But, you know, and really that's the interesting thing about Nations is players do not engage in direct conflict. Now, players can take steps that can hurt other players in kind of an indirect way. And I think in that regard, it works totally fine. And I think that the fact that I'm predisposed to love the subject matter, and Nations is the only, you know, big box, epic, you know, full civilization game that has the brains to take all the nasty punch you in the face stuff out. That's what puts Nations at the top. Now, Nations, actually, I'm thinking about it, this might be my most controversial one because there are a lot of people, you know, particularly I just got through talking about how great it is that Nations doesn't have to be all about warfare and military and stuff. There's a lot of people out there that have a very, very wrong-headed view of Nations and think that the game is almost kind of broken and that it's too skewed, that you have to go heavily into military to succeed. I just want to say for the record, although I've said this on the record several times, that is so wrong. Military in this game is very, very expensive. And yes, if you get a strong military, it gives you a lot of benefits, a lot of powers, you know, getting to go first in turn order and, you know, giving you a better than average chance of, you know, dealing with, what do you call them? You know, disasters and, you know, and various things. But it's expensive to maintain that military, and so if you're not pushing hard on military, that frees you up to spend those resources on other stuff. If you're not going heavy into military, you have enough resources to basically expand your population much earlier, which gives you a lot more opportunities to create lots more goods. My favorite nation in this game, you know, Jen and I, we just played another game last week, I think, is to play Egypt on the side of the board that has no military at all. And Jen and I, we just played this the other day, you know, and she had a very, very military-focused thing. I didn't dabble with military almost at all. At the very, very last round of the 8 rounds, I did go into military a little bit because some cards came up, and it just made sense to do it. But you can do very, very well avoiding military in this game, and that's another way. And God, I just love the fact that, you know, of all the historical personages they decide to put front and center is like their, well, obviously they really highlight Lincoln here, but I love they highlight Marie Curie too. That, you know, there's this strong sense of, I just like everything about this game. It's just wonderful on so many levels, and I don't think I'm going to make 30 minutes because I just probably blathered on for over 5 minutes just talking about my first of 10. So that's going to be at least an hour if I don't. Come on, let's move. Okay, so anyway, that was number 10, Nations. Now let's move on to number 9. Ironically, another nation building game, Peloponnes. Oh, what a wonderful game. This is actually one of the first run-throughs I ever did. So sorry if you want to go and watch it now. It's really like, oh, I just hate looking at it because I was filming with an iPhone and I didn't know what I was doing. But still, great, great game. Now, obviously it must be because it's my number 9. Now, this is another game, although that is all about building civilization, although it sticks strictly in the age of antiquity. It does not move, you know, into the Middle Ages or the Renaissance or the modern era or anything like that. It definitely stays back, you know, in pre-Roman times. And at its heart, it is an auction game. And that's actually probably one of the things I love about this game more than anything else is that this Peloponnes proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can have an amazing gameplay experience for only 2 players that is centered around auctions. And Peloponnes, it is great. It's by far our favorite auction. Well, actually, I tell a lie. There's another auction game coming a little bit later. But it's a great, great auction game, incredibly exciting, incredibly tense, and incredibly satisfying as you, build up your little civilization. And, it just plays so smooth and so sweet and is so involving, because every move you make is so tied because of those auctions to what your opponent is doing. It's just really, really brilliantly done. There's this great level of push your luck as well, because you can keep on trying to build. There's 2 ways you can push your luck. You build kind of oblivious to the fact that disasters are looming, and you can hope that the disaster won't hit, so you can try to squeeze another round in before you protect yourself from the disaster and get more stuff. You can also push your luck. But in the actual building, when you get tiles and build them to expand your civilization, you don't have to pay up front. You can pay later. And that's actually really, really cool. But then the tricky thing is, you can never be quite certain when payday is going to come, and you have to have money on hand to be able to pay that later. Brilliant game. It's had a million little expansions too, although just even the base game by itself is fantastic. I've also played this with 2, me and Jen. I've also played it with 6. One of the expansions lets you play this with 6. Plays just as well. Wonderful game, scales nicely, just so satisfying and so much fun. Number 9, Peloponnes. Number 8. What's this? Another civilization building game? I'm starting to see a pattern here. Seven Wonders. Okay, this is a card game. This is, by the way, is the only game I'm going to talk about today that I have not already done a run through for. I've never done a run through for Seven Wonders. It's never really gotten much. I've never really gotten much pressure. I think it's because everybody in the world has already played this game, and so they don't need to see a run through of it. Although honestly, people might be surprised for me to put this because a lot of people dismiss Seven Wonders as a terrible two-player game because, well, okay, at its heart, this is another, Age of Antiquities, or, this is really kind of more, the height of Rome's power and stuff like that. Civilization building game. It's a card drafting game where everybody has a hand of cards, and every turn they're going to play one card and then give the rest to the next player and take others from somebody. And so you play that way over 7 rounds. That tie to the 7 ages and 7 wonders and all that. So 3 ages, 7 rounds, 3 ages. So basically, you play 21 cards over the course of the game, and at the end, you have built this wonderful civilization that maybe is focused really on military or focused on science, or it's really focused on culture, or it's spread and it's done a lot of different things. But the core of the game is all about that impossibly difficult choice of, I've got this card. I want to play it. It's so good for me. But then I have to give all the rest of these cards to my neighbor. And if I give him this card, that will be even better for him. And so what do? Do I play the one that's good for me and then give him the one that's better and hope, and maybe that won't work out? Or do I take the one that's better for him and bury it, get rid of it, thereby preventing me from getting what I really want and hand it on? That tension is so sweet and so wonderful and so amazing too. I've played this game dozens and dozens of times at the full 5, 6, or 7 player complement, because at one of my old jobs, we would play this every day at lunch, a whole big group of us. It was always best when it's at 7. And it was wonderful that 7 people could have a really rich, exciting, tense Euro game that we could finish in under an hour. It's an amazing design accomplishment, 7 Wonders. But I strayed from topic. A lot of people say, yeah, it's great if you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 players, but it's a terrible 2-player game. For the record, 7 Wonders, I personally believe, is at its best when you're playing with only 2 players. That is the best player count to play it. And so I'm always thinking I should do a run through to demonstrate why it's such a great 2-player game, because Jen, I really enjoy it. And maybe I will someday. But in the meantime, I did talk about more, and I showed the back of the box and talked about that in, I think this was a 2010 game, so this is my top 10 games of 2010. You can learn more about there. Moving on to number 10, 9, 8, number 7. Oh, this is getting embarrassing. Another build up your civilization game, Keyflower. And interestingly, this is the other big auction game on my top 10. People always say it's impossible to have good 2-player auction games. Bullpucky, I say. Someday I'll do a top 10 auction game. So there's a lot of great auction games that play with only 2, but Peloponnes and Keyflower, spoiler alert, they're the best. Keyflower is an amazing, amazing game that is all about building your civilization up in the new world. Although it's basically a fictional amalgam world called. Well, basically, everybody sails over on the Keyflower instead of the Mayflower, but you are settling the new world, and your workforce is comprised of little meeples of different colors, and the different colors represent different countries from the old world. And the interesting thing is, your meeples don't necessarily get along with each other. They kind of hate each other, because the little German meeples don't necessarily like the little English meeples, don't necessarily like the little French meeples, and so you have this interesting thing where you're trying to do worker placement, but as you place workers out onto the board, other workers won't work with them. And so you have that tricky thing. But then on top of that, what's even cooler is you have your workers that you use to gather goods and all that, but you also use your workers as basic resources in the auction to get all these new tiles of land in the new world. And so you have this really tense decision you always have to make of, okay, do I keep these guys so I can use them as workers to generate goods, or do I use these guys as money so I can buy this tile so that these other guys can work on it? It's in a brilliant game. This mix of genres, of gameplay styles and mechanisms is amazing. It's mind-numbingly good, just how wonderful Keyflower is. And again, you can watch a run-through of that and learn more. I'm still talking too much. I've described the games I've described in the past. But the reason it's on the top 10 is because of, that's why I was describing it, that incredible tension, but those tough decisions of how do you spend your workforce, and it makes you completely rethink worker placement. It radically flips the script on worker placement because workers have such a bigger meaning in this game, and that's why I love it. Not to mention the fact that it is a game that is all about, again, building. And an interesting thing is, all of these games I've mentioned so far, they're all about building, and none of them are about tearing down your opponents. Even though Seven Wonders, you can go heavy into military, even in that game, it's not about tearing your opponents down. If I have a higher military than my neighbor, I earn points. And yes, they lose a little bit of points, but it's kind of inconsequential. It's not about me, oh, I've made a big military and now I will come and steal all your stuff, or I will destroy all your stuff. I hate that. So, I love that these games let me build and they let me focus on what I want to do, but they're not necessarily multiplayer solitaire because every step I take in all of these games is still very lockstep tied to what my opponents are doing, because I have to pay attention to what they're doing because what they do so strongly affects me. And now, moving on to number 5. And I think this one's actually going to be a little bit different, although in some ways it's the same, because number 5 is Castles of Burgundy, or Die Burgen von Burgund. A nice little play on words if you have the original German version like I do. Wonderful, wonderful game. Stefan Feld's best game. My only Feld that's in my top 10, although there's a few more that are in my top 20. Great, great game. Once again, a game where I find myself building up something. In this case, I'm building up basically a city-state in 15th century France in the Loire Valley. And why is this on? I've done a run through for it. Everybody knows about this game. It's very, very well known. Why is it in my top 10? Why did it make it over all the other Felds? Why did it make it over the 4 games I just talked about? Well, what it comes down to more than anything else is, I think of all the games I've got laid out here today, this one is the most elegant. And to me, elegance is another key component I'm always looking for in games. I'm a die-hard, Eurogamer. I can't stand, or I have a very, very difficult time accepting overweight, overgrown, bloated, crazy Ameritrash style rule sets that have a billion little rules for every single circumstance you find yourself in the game. That just drives me nuts. I look at that and it's just sloppy, and I find no enjoyment in that sort of thing at all. Castles of Burgundy is the epitome of the opposite direction, where in this game, all you do every turn, or every round, is you roll some dice and then you just place those dice. That's it. You have an incredibly small, simple toy that you're playing with, just my dice, and how do I use them? And but just from that one simple thing you've got, such a huge wealth of possibilities opens up in front of you and gives you so many different paths you could pursue towards victory. There are so many ways to earn points in this game, and success comes from knowing how to balance, the worth of improving my region's shipping ability versus my region's livestock. If we go heavily into cows and sheep and pigs, or mining, am I going to push harder into mining? Because there's all these different things I could be building up, all these different little industries and I'm making those choices just by rolling dice and placing them. It's so simple, but those decisions are so deep and meaty and have so much weight. But the mechanics are so simple and streamlined. There's a lot of games that do that, but I don't think anybody does it better than Castles of Burgundy. Kramer and Kiesling games are really well known for that too. But Castles of Burgundy, I just love this game to death. Every time I play it, it is so much fun. The decision-making process, and again, another example of at the end, when it's all done, I feel like I've done something. I feel like I've built something. I feel good about the time I've spent. And another game where, again, I never attack Jen in this game, but every time Jen makes a move, I am, on pins and needles, waiting to see what she's going to do because it will affect me so greatly. So anyway, that was number 5, Castles of Burgundy. Picking up pace a little bit now. That's pretty good. Number 4. Would you believe it's another building game? It's Troyes, where players are rich French nobles helping to rebuild the French city of Troyes. And again, this is another example of me being, I am. Is there any game that isn't about this? In fact, yes, there are, of the 4 remaining games, 2 of them are not about building a culture or a society. And one of them, in fact, is not about building at all. But 9 out of these 10 is about building something, and 8 of the 10 is actually about building a city or a state or a nation or an entire civilization. So obviously, I guess, I never really thought about it. You know, there's this common thread throughout these 10 games, but it's plain as day. That's clearly what I love, and these just happen to be the 10 best or the 9 best games all about building, or the 8 best games about building societal structures. And like I said, number 4 is Troyes. In this one, we're helping rebuild a city, and there's a lot of stuff going on in this game. This game, you are balancing your time between, there's constant problems besetting our city that at the beginning of every round can have the impact, or that have the potential to affect all of us, depending on how we play and what our strengths and weaknesses are. And at the beginning of every round, the city itself calls upon us to directly fight and try to overcome those problems. To me, I think that's actually one of my favorite things about Troyes, is that it's not quite, but it's almost a semi-cooperative game, because our common city, you and me, we're competitors in this game, and yet we are both beset by the same problems. And the city we are working together to build calls upon us to work together to stop these things. And I mean, that is a level of interaction I think is absolutely lovely. And so that's half of what I love about the game. The kind of camaraderie, even though we're all competitors, we're all trying to score the most points and the most glory for our family name. And then the other thing I love about it too is, well, it's a dice game. This is, like Burgundy, this is all about rolling and using dice smartly. Now I gotta say, I love rolling dice. Dice are absolutely lovely. In fact, let's see, which ones is it? These are the only 2 though. These are the only 2 of my top 10 that feature dice, but their entire life's blood is all about rolling dice and then finding cool, clever, unexpected, creative uses for those dice. That's what I love about Burgundy and Troyes, is that, you would think, oh, I'll just roll some dice and hey, I got a 3 and a 6. I guess that means I'll choose that. It's not about that. It's, that choice about how to use that 3 and that 6, or, that yellow die and that red die in combination. There's so much thought that goes into it. And again, I'm just repeating myself, but I'm trying to get at what makes these special. Troyes, that kind of almost semi-cooperative element where we work together, coupled with the fact that I'm getting to roll a bunch of dice every turn, and then I've got this little puzzle to solve in front of me of how do I best use these dice. And now, actually, I think it's true, yes. Of all the games I've talked about, this is the meanest game. This one, you could argue, has the closest thing to direct player attacking, because after we all roll our dice and we put them on the board, and I'm trying to say, okay, I've got these dice and I could do this, I could help rebuild the cathedral with the dice, I could fight some more problems, I could build up a guild over here, I could do all these things with these dice. Oh, but what I really want to do is, I really want to throw this parade. That's one of the things you do. You throw a parade, and there's so many things you can do in this game. And I really want to throw a great parade because it's going to bring me so much glory, so many points. It's by far the best thing. But I don't have the dice I need. I need another yellow die to do it, or another red die to do it, and I don't have it. But Jen does. Right there, it's my turn. Honey, I'm going to give you some money and buy that die from you. You're like, no! And she needs that die so desperately. Why would she have it otherwise? There is a little bit of, gotcha. But, it's mitigated somewhat by the fact I don't steal her die, I pay her for it. And that money is tight in this game, and it's a big deal to get more money. So, it's not so much that it introduces like this kind of mean streak to the game, but this kind of element of random chaos, that you have all these things, you figure, okay, I know what I'm gonna do with it, but there's always that random seed of, what if somebody interferes? But at least if they do interfere, I'll get something back. So I do think that while Troyes has a little bit more teeth than what we generally like, I like how it's integrated as well, because it's still not about me killing you or stealing things from you. I buy things from you. And in that regard, it feels a little bit softer, a little bit gentler, and it's my number 4, Troyes. Now, number 3, this is the one out of 10 games that is not about building something. What would the verb of this game be? The verb in this game is defend or protect. And that's another thing I really, really like. As you can see, the verbs that, the verbs I like to build, I like to explore, I like to protect, I like to progress, I like to grow, which is like another form, it's like personal growth as opposed to external growth. These positive verbs are the types to get in. The majority of these games on the board, on this wall, they all have those verbs. You'll see very few games on my wall where the primary verb is kill. Or at least kill my opponent. And enough about the preamble. What is this one non-building, this protection game? Well, if you are familiar with my history at all in board games, you already know what it is. Say it with me, folks. 3, 2, 1. Pandemic. That's right. This is also the only co-op game on my list. And this is a game not about building something. You already are who you are. And this is a... What is it? It's a cross between hand management. It's all about your hand of cards and set collection, getting the right set of cards into your hand at the right time, while splitting your time between that and trying to save the world as a global pandemic of 4 different virulent viruses are intent on spreading as fast as possible and literally wiping out mankind. The stakes are incredibly high in this game, and while you're not, there's a tiny bit of building, but you're not really building anything in this game. You are not proactive in this game. For the most part, you're reactive because the board is constantly exploding with more and more viruses, and players have to work together to divvy up their time. Fight fires in all the hot spots of the world. It has a really atmospheric feel too. You really do feel like you are jet setting around the world to all these exotic locations and trying to save people. I mean, it just feels good to succeed in this game. But while you're doing that, there's always this pressure to divide your time between just protecting people and also building that proper hand of, that proper hand of cards that will let you actually wipe out the viruses, because we can fight the viruses till doomsday, but if we don't actually cure the viruses, we'll never win, and we will eventually, just as a war of attrition, lose. And it's a brilliant game. The mechanisms are second to none. I've done a run through for it. I talked about this game in many others in my, and I will be talking about it in other top 10s. But it's just an incredible game. Also, for the record, this is the game that got me and Jen into, this is our gateway game. This is our gateway drug. And so maybe this is on the list to a certain extent because there's some nostalgia as well, but I don't really think so, because another thing this game does so well, we love the idea of cooperating. We would much rather cooperate than compete if ever possible. If we're playing a competitive game, there is no greater outcome to me and Jen than to get a tie, which means everybody wins, nobody loses. That's the way we look at it. And so we love cooperative games. But 9 times out of 10, cooperative games follow this pattern that Jen hates, which is all about just putting constant, nonstop pressure on you, the player, and never letting up until you just get beaten down by the weight of whatever is assaulting you. Pandemic has that, but Pandemic comes and goes. It travels in a wave. I've talked about this before, where you spend a good deal of time where everything is okay, but then all of a sudden a certain card will get revealed that will plummet you into the depths of despair, as it looks like you've gone from everything was great to, oh my gosh, we're about to die. And then you put on hold what you were planning to do and just fight back that up. But you will fight back. You will get back in control. And that seesaw of emotion makes Pandemic a much better roller coaster ride than the majority of co-op games on the market. Because the majority of co-op games, they just start and they just go and they go and they go and they go and they go faster. I think that single vector of experience is not as exciting. A roller coaster that did nothing than have you go down a very steep hill for 5 minutes and nothing else happened would be not a very good roller coaster. Roller coasters need to have those breaks so you can build and have anticipation again. That's what Pandemic does so well. That's why it's the best co-op game on the market, and it's also why it's our number 3 game of all time. But I've talked about that enough. Let's talk about number 2. And we're back to building something, although this is the only game where you're not actually building some kind of society, whether it's a city or a country or a nation or a civilization. You are building something much, much smaller and much, much sweeter. You're building dungeon pets. This is a game, and I've talked about this before. I've done a run through for it. Oh my gosh, it's I forget. This might have made Jen's number 1. This might be her favorite game of all time. It's my second. We both love this game so much. And again, it is a game that's all about building or raising. In this game, you run a pet store. for dungeon lords, because you don't raise puppies and parakeets and goldfish. You raise ghosts and ghouls and goblins and baby dragons and all kinds of cute, lovely, adorable fantasy creatures. And it's your job to raise them from the egg up, through babyhood, through all the way up into adolescence. Deal with all their needs, whether they need to be fed, whether they need to be played with, whether they need to be cleaned up after, and you're trying to raise the perfect, well-balanced, happy, pet, because the better your pet is, the more you can sell it for when the dungeon lords come looking to buy. And the thing is, you can see those dungeon lords coming. You can see them several rounds in advance. So 3 rounds from now, the guy who really likes, the farmer who wants a pet who generates a lot of manure is coming in 2 rounds. And let's see, and I can see the pets that I could start raising right now. And that pet, I sense in him a great capacity for poo. He might, so I'm going to raise him. And so you're raising him, and you're raising him to become a poo machine. So that when the farmer shows up in whatever, a couple of seasons, or whatever, in a few rounds, he will make the biggest mess you ever saw, and that farmer will say, "That's my pet. I will pay you, the sky's the limit. I'll pay you whatever it takes to get that guy." The fantasy of this game is so all-encompassing and so original and so unique. It has to be number 2. But then on top of that, besides from just the gameplay, gameplay that could actually model everything I just described is mind-bogglingly original. But then on top of that, this game is also incredible because it is so sweethearted. I compel you, I confound you, cold-hearted, analytical gamer, bloodthirsty, war gamer, whoever you are, to not fall in love with these little pets as you raise them up from babies. And you make sure they're happy, you attend to all their needs, you revel in their successes, and you cry with them in their failures. There's no worse feeling in all of board gamedom than to know that as your pet was really hungry and you didn't feed him, and what you do is whenever you fail your pet, you don't feed them, you don't play with them, you don't give them whatever they need, you have to put a despair cube on them. It's like this little cloudy, it looks like a cube of sadness. And the more sad they become, eventually if too many of them come, they'll run away. And that's just, you get so emotionally wrapped up. At least Jen and I do. I don't know. Maybe the cold-hearted, analytical Vulcans out there and the bloodthirsty war gamers won't. But Jen and I, we really get emotionally connected to these little characters. And that's amazing that just some pieces of cardboard can do that. And that's probably more than anything else why Dungeon Petz makes it to number 2. But it doesn't make it to number 1. Now, chances are, a lot of you are saying, come on, say it, we know what it is. And yeah, it's Agricola, the number 1 game by far. And actually, I talked about Agricola recently when I did my top 10 worker placement games. And I mentioned in that one, spoiler alert, Agricola is probably going to make it into my top 10 of all. It is. It's the best game we own. It's the best game I've ever played. And it's odd for me to say that because I didn't even put it in my top 10 worker placement games. And I'll repeat why I did that again, because a lot of people were up in arms about how could you, Agricola is not a particularly great worker placement game. It's interesting, Dungeon Petz is a much better worker placement game than Agricola. Troyes, arguably, although some would argue it's not, is a much better worker placement game. Keyflower is an amazing worker placement game, much better than Agricola. Agricola is not an amazing worker placement game. It is a very vanilla, very by the book, doesn't do anything special or particularly interesting. It's kind of a dinosaur. So it's not the worker placement. And I should say, just on the off chance you've never heard of Agricola and have no idea what it is, this is a game where this is another building game. Although, of all the games I've talked about, it has the smallest scale. Or at least it's tied with Dungeon Petz. Dungeon Petz, you're building, you're raising creatures, living creatures. In Agricola, you are building and maintaining a farm, a family farm that you and your family, and you're also building your own personal family. You start out as a husband and wife team on a small German medieval farm. And the whole point of the game is just to survive, or not survive, to thrive, to build from nothing, from a little tiny 2-room wooden hut out in the middle of the swamp. And to start raising, livestock, and to start growing crops, and to start training and educating yourself, and also to get busy and start having kids, because when you have kids, they become additional workers. Very, very standard stuff. And all that stuff is great. You know, it's very atmospheric. It's very thematic. You really do feel, you feel the pressure because when winter's coming, you don't want anybody to go hungry. You know, all that stuff. It works really, really well. But that's not what puts this at number one. What makes this by far our number one game of all time, and it was in Jen's top 10 too. I remember where it landed for her. It was pretty near the top. What makes it our number one is the cards, because every time you start playing, the first thing that happens is everybody gets a big handful of 14 cards, 7 occupations and 7 improvements. The occupations are cards that you can play to teach your family members, the husband, the wife, or the kids, to teach them new skills that let them break the rules of the game and you'll get new specialties that allow them to succeed. And the improvements are basically improvements you can make to your farmstead, either to the home you live in, to the land you grow on, to the animals you're raising, to the crops you're raising. And the game comes with hundreds of these. And the game has been out for many, many years now, and hundreds of additional cards have come out. There are so many cards now for Agricola. So many. And this is not all of them. I just have a bunch of them in this box. I've got another box with them. Every time you play, when you get those initial 14 cards, you are going to find yourself looking down the barrel of a radically fresh, new, different puzzle to solve. Because before the game even starts, you have to figure out from those cards, right, these are the options I have. The game itself is going to play out in a pretty straightforward way. I'm going to place workers, I'm going to get resources, I'm going to feed my family, I'm going to try to do all these standard things. But it's these cards I've got, because in a given game, I'm only going to be able to play 3, 4, maybe 5 of these 14 cards. The other ones, they're wasted. And I have to figure out what is the best combination of these cards, which will synergize the best. And in case my plans go awry because I can't get what I need to play one of these cards, to educate myself in some particular skill, what fallback plans do I have? Jen and I find the puzzle of taking these 14 cards and bending them to our will within the confines of a very straightforward worker placement game to be so compelling and satisfying that, well, quite frankly, it makes it into my number one slot of all time. It is the best game out there because there is so much infinite replayability. And it's built off the backbone of, admittedly, very vanilla, but very strong and well-balanced worker placement gameplay. Everything just sings in this game. And again, it's interesting. Going back to number 10, when I'm done with playing Nations, and I can sit back and look, and I have told the history of modern man in my own special way. And it is a really interesting story about how my culture evolved and what I focused on and what our strengths and our weaknesses were. And that's very cool and that's very compelling. But if I look at Agricola, and I look at what I built at the end, it's a very small, it's a very, very tiny scale, but it's very personal. And it tells a very human story as opposed to a societal story. And it's one that I do think, again, for me, has real meaning, and I can really connect to it because I feel like I have lived through that. Because the other thing I haven't mentioned, Agricola is a very, very harsh, challenging game. You really have to play at your best to be able to meet all the needs of your growing family and to thrive. It is not a cakewalk in any way, shape, or form. It's equally true for Nations as well. And so I love rising to that challenge, and I love looking back at the end of the game and seeing what I have created because it's personal and has meaning for me. Now, actually, one thing I will say, because a lot of people are going on about how Caverna destroys Agricola. I talked about this quite a bit in a couple other videos, but I'll just reiterate. A lot of people have a mistaken assumption about Agricola, that at the end of the game, what I'm talking about is not true. I was about to say a bad word. I was trying to think of a nice word to say. Horse pucky? Yeah, because every time you play Agricola, you'll always get the exact same results. You'll always get the exact same farm. And all I gotta say is I feel bad for the people who have tried to play Agricola and have not learned how to play it such that their farms are a personal reflection of what they are. Because when Jen and I play it, we've played this game probably 30, maybe close to 40 times now, every time we play, we have radically different farms that have grown and evolved in really interesting and unique ways. We look at our, we have a scorecards for all the games we've ever played, and every time our primary score methods are coming from radically different sources. And a lot of people say, well, no, you have to get one of everything in the game. That's not true. You fundamentally don't get how to play Agricola. And I don't know. That, if people like Caverna, which basically just hands everything you want on a silver platter, and there's no, that sense of challenge and overcoming impossible odds is really absent from Caverna. That sense of making a plan and seeing it through to fruition is really largely compromised in Caverna. I'm sorry, I don't need to make this about Agricola Caverna thing. It's just every time, I really wish I'd been on that Dice Tower Showdown, because I really wanted to, anyway. Long story short, I'm sorry, I really got sidetracked and I'm probably really burning through the time, but Agricola is easily my #1 game of all time. Absolutely fantastic. And there you go, folks. That's the top 10. Now, links for all these games, of course, are on the screen wherever I will ultimately end up putting these buttons. So you can watch run-throughs for all of them except for Poor Seven Wonders, but you can go watch where I talk more about the particulars of gameplay. I think it was the top 10 of 2010, I think. But the link is on screen. Also, if you're curious about what other games I like, not everybody knows this. If you go to Board Game Geek and look up my profile, I'm just Rahdo on Board Game Geek, I list every single game we own, and I rank every single game relative to every other one. So you don't have to know what my top 10 is. You can know what my top 350 are. So if you're curious about that, the links are in the show notes. You can go check that out and see what just missed number 11 and number 12 and so on. And heck, maybe someday I'll do my top 10 to 20 or something like that. But anyway. That's it, folks. I'm sure I've gone way over 30 minutes. The thing doesn't really tell me, it just says it's recording. Thanks, camera. But I'm going to stop right there and wish you all a very happy day. Hope I didn't rant too terribly much. Hopefully this was of some use to folks. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And I'm stopping right there. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.